All right, I am recording the patch notes because I have unlisted the previous video. I was raging on it. So I'm gonna try to be more constructive. If you wanna see me raging like a child, you can though check the description. Let's go over the changes and why they're horrible, and talk about the state of the class pretty much. So we have the first thing, which is the gift of the stag. This is gonna be a recurrent situation where, well, they're increasing the maximum spirit from 20 to 40. Is that gonna be used ever by anyone? No. If you make changes that no one is ever gonna use for any build, it's an issue. You're wasting time, you're wasting developers' effort, and it's just very, it shows a lack of care and understanding. You are just trying to increase something till, till it's useful. You think that maybe if I keep buffing it, eventually it gets used. It does not work like that. A lot of the changes that they make are worthless because of this. Thorns, for example, the amount of prickle skin thorn is increased by 100%. This is like, maybe leveling, you could maybe take this, right? But it's really not something you should put in patch notes. It's not something you should have a developer input in the game. It's a waste of time. Advantageous Beast. Previously, reduced the duration of card control effect by 15%. Now, you gain 15% movement speed. This is one change that, now at least you took a look at it, and it went from something useless to at least might have some niche cases. This is a better change than Gift of the Stag, but still, probably gonna need a rework for boons. It's kind of useless, maybe for Gauntlet. The Scythe Talon, crit chance goes from 5 to 10. They're trying to increase their damage. Okay. Iron Feather, 14 to 20%. Swooping attacks, 10 to 15%. So pretty much, the same boons will get used. That doesn't buff the one that are not gonna get used. Energize, Spirit increase from 20 to 30. They are trying to address the Spirit issue Druid has by buffing random things. I think reducing the cost of all the skills we have would have been a better choice. There's some buff to Uber items that I skipped over, but we can go and take a look. For example, Ring of the Starless Sky, which now has more cost reduction and more damage. Still, the item is useless for us. Same thing for the Another Visage, which is actually a bit better for Rogue, but a 50% damage increase for us does not do anything. I think it's overall, though, a good change. If you're trying to make some poison builds out of Another Visage for Rogues, this can make sense. The buff to healing potions and the legendary aspect protector do not make any sense. Nor do really do anything. I mean, yeah, the potion was kind of useless, but I think it's still going to be largely useless. Because you have 100,000 HP, so, buffing the potion by 200% is not going to be a meaningful change. Let's keep going. So, like we talked about, Energize is useless as a buff. We would rather have passive resource generation, or we would rather have the cost of our skills reduced. Or maybe some talents that reduce the cost of our skills. Bolster, Fortify amount increased. Again, they see that maybe, let's buff this. Let's see what it does for them. Do we really need more Fortify? No. It's like, again, you're wasting patch notes. Obsidian Slam. Kills required to guaranteed overpowered was from 20 to 10. They're trying to buff Pulverize and other builds without really understanding the depth to which the build is failing or why the build is failing, Pulverize does not have access to Thunderstruck. All builds based on either earth damage or non-Thunderstruck build in general are falling behind. They're failing to address this, and we're gonna keep looking at that through the patch notes. Really, the patch notes, the vibe is we're just gonna throw random numbers because you've been complaining about it. But the random numbers are not something we tested, not something we really know what we're doing. And we're just gonna throw random numbers at it. And now the worst change, the most embarrassing one in my opinion, is the Rabies damage has been increased again by 25%. Every patch this happens. The build is doing 0 damage almost, so buffing it by 25%, not gonna change anything. It's not able to clear a Nightmare Dungeon, let alone a pit. So a 25% damage buff is not gonna do anything for us. You need to try the build and then think about, okay, how much damage do I want the build to make? And how much do I have to buff it to reach that point? If you just throw random numbers, it just really shows me that you are not putting in the effort. There might be other reasons why they're not doing it. To me, when I see this, I feel like, you're not putting in the effort. Pulverize, sometimes they do this, like they throw one wild buff, 76%. Again, without understanding where the problem is. It can work for, if the class is really OP, like Barbarian, you throw a 900% buff to charge. People play Charge Barb that season, the builder, because the class is really good, but throwing a 76% damage increase to Pulverize is not gonna do anything. Because the build is falling behind due to the inability to leverage more overpowers and the lack of Thunderstruck and other legendary nodes not being as good at Thunderstruck. So now Pulverize is, falling behind. Also the tempering it has, it's very weak. A little bit of a buff if the enemies are stunned. Pulverize now does more damage. Now Pulverize will clear a couple of tiers higher. Nature's Fury, passive, they're buffing some of Keystones here. So we have Nature's Fury, it goes from 30 to 35. That's a good buff and makes Landstorm better, but is not nearly enough to make the build feel better. It would have to be, maybe if it was up to 50 or 60%, you could start to, say something, but they're they're doing those small buffs because they do not know where they are. They don't have an idea, okay, where do I want to go? Play the build, test the build with, take Planner, and you'll see how far you are from your target. Perfect Storm, damage is 30%, it's more competitive with your Ursine Strength now. So it's a good change because now you can take this on a Tornado build. Nature's Reach, damage to the instant has been increased, small percentage here and there. It's a good way, I think. It's still not enough, so that we prefer to take this over Venom on many builds, but it's a buff to some builds. Toxic Claw is another of those buffs where they see that something does not get used and they try to buff it without understanding that it's completely worthless and it would need to be 10x to maybe be played. Even a 10x, I don't think it will be played. Poison builds for Druid does not work. The only one that works is the Wind Shear one, because the way the damage scales when it comes from an aspect is different. There's some trickery there, but normal poison builds like Rabies, Shred, applying poison just do not really work well. We have Quick Shift. Maximum damage bonus has been increased. Quick Shift, that's a buff, but it's one on top of the other. They're trying to go like that, but they should honestly all be on the level of Envenom so that people can stop only needing Envenom amulets. It's the only way to do it, and also the Druid class is severely lacking in damage, so you really have to pump numbers very high to go back to other classes. We are super behind. Defensive Posture increases the amount of Fortify that, you get hit. No, sorry. Increase the amount of Fortify from all sources. That's the first talent in the skill tree for the Fortify, line. And now also has some damage reduction. That's a good change because now it makes those points, you can spend more interesting, and it gives you some defensive options extra for certain builds that have extra points to spend. Mending, previously in Werebear form you were getting extra healing. Now you get extra HP on top of that. It's a good change because it was useless before. Now it can be used for defense in some builds. It's a good change. Provocation, and it will probably be played in a lot of builds. Provocation, in Werebear form, if you're in it, you get an overpowered every 12 seconds now instead of every 16 seconds. Play the build, and my opinion is play the build, and the problem is that you cannot force overpowers, and that's an issue because it's boring to wait 12 seconds. There should be a way to generate overpowers like Barbarians had in the past. 2 seconds you get an overpower, 2 seconds you get an overpowered, but we have to wait 12 seconds and 10 seconds and kill 10 units. Or play with the useless amulet, and that's just not fun. Legendary aspects. We have Trample the Earth. Landslide damage increased from 80% to 100%. This doesn't do anything because the build is unplayable because of various reasons. Among them, the fact that the build pushes away enemies, and also other ones, the build is very clunky now. Again, if you play the build, you would know that this is not going to do anything. Subterranean aspect, it's a 5% buff. That's a 5% buff, that's what it does. Aspect of the alpha, it's a buff to pet builds. Are pet builds gonna be now good with a 15% extra damage on aspect of the alpha? No. So, we use less buffs. Really, I don't know what to say. Unsatiated aspects, shred damage, and this has been buffed many times. They could have done, could be 200% honestly now, and it could have been made 200% on the first time that they did this change, so that they can then work on other things. They keep doing 5% on the same things over and over and over, and they're never good, and they keep doing it. And it will keep doing it till it gets good, which is never going to happen in a realistic time frame. The unsatiated aspect gives 35% now to werewolf skills. It's a little bit hard to read this aspect. When you read it in the entirely of its form, you'll see that it's not only for shred but for all werewolf skills. So it's a buff, and it is now better than retaliation for any build that uses Tempest Roar. Paragon, instead of doing changes to things that we asked, and that frankly every Druid player knows, like Earth and Devastation being capped at 40% while Thunderstruck is uncapped. You know that, You are maybe a dad watching this video, you're maybe a student, you play a couple of hours, you're not a developer, you're not a Diablo 4 expert, and you know that. And they don't, but they get paid for that job. It's tough. That's a tough critique, but it has been beaten down. The Earth and Devastation problem has been beaten down by the community, and if you do not know that by now, I will question how much you actually care. Dominate Glyph, bonus damage. It's damage increase to Constricting Tendrils from 120 to 150%. The Constricting Tendrils legendary node that never gets used, they know it never gets used, right? So they buff it by something that they think is big, 30%. But when you buff something that does 0 by X, it's still 0. Same issue with, 90% of these patch notes. Dominate Glyph, again, giving you like a little bit of damage. They do not want to go overboard because they don't really know what they're doing. That's my feeling. It's tough critique. I understand that. And probably if the developers see this video, they're probably going to be mad about it and not really going to like me much. But, they do really good job with certain things. Like the game has improved a lot in Season 4, but really bad balance, in my opinion. Tormented bosses are their health reduced. I don't know about that. I think they were already a good point. Health and damage levels have been reduced in the pit. The adjustment is most significant. Players approaching tier 60. Bug fixes. Holy bolts like 0 damage was scaling unintentionally high when it was triggered from passes and necromancer's minions. Fix the bug. Casting boulders with Almond Stone will cause it to not cast at all. Maybe they're talking about the tempering, I don't know. But anyway, boulders now have a limit of 10 and the damage is increased by 10% for each boulder that you cast. The build is still useless and really not viable, but you know, they did an effort. Still, without having tried the build and understanding the issues of the build and how clunky it is and all the problems it has, it will not be played. It's another patch that we got with buffs to boulder, sorry, bug fix to boulder and a buff to rabies. Like, I want to really stress out how they're bug fixing boulder again for them. How many bug fixes we had? I think 3 or 4 this season only. And all of those bug fixes could have been done when they released Dolmen Stone if they tried the build. But they have not done that. So every patch, and there is more bugs. So, I mean, next patch, I wouldn't be surprised if we see a 20% damage buff to rabies and another bug fix to boulder. I do not know why they refuse to talk with people, read a little bit the feeling, try the class. But it's disconcerting. Guys, thank you for watching. I will see you guys in the next video, and I will definitely update some builds and do a recap of the builds that maybe I have changed and why in my next one.